Iraqi security forces are embroiled in a fierce fight to reclaim the city of Fallujah from ISIL fighters. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. Iraqi government forces and Shiite militias are facing heavy resistance from ISIL militants determined to hold on to the strategic city of Fallujah, west of Baghdad. Tens of thousands of troops backed by US-led airstrikes have had some success clearing villages to the north and south of the city, but the offensive has slowed down. Iraqi officials are concerned for the safety of 50,000 civilians who remain trapped in the city. The United Nations says an estimated 20,000 children are among the families struggling with dwindling water and food supplies.
We gave civilians inside Fallujah the option to either flee through safe exits we guaranteed for them or stay in their houses. The main target of the operation now is to reduce the number of victims among civilians and also to minimize losses among our armed forces. The enemy has planted many bombs. However, we may raise the Iraqi flag inside Fallujah in the coming days.
For the latest now on efforts to reclaim Fallujah, we turn to CCTV's Susanna George in Baghdad. And Susanna, ISIL fighters have held that city of Fallujah for 2 years. Do we have any idea of how many fighters are there, and how challenging will it be for Iraqi forces to retake that city?
The U.S.-led coalition estimates that it's anywhere between 500 and 700 IS fighters who are inside Fallujah. But it's not only the fighters' sheer numbers that are presenting a problem for Iraqi troops who are trying to push into the city proper. It's also that these fighters have had more than 2 years to dig into the city and build up their defenses. Commanders on the ground say that they've encountered defenses greater than any of the others that they have in the fight against IS in other parts of the country. Complex tunnel systems and sniper positions that have prevented Iraqi troops from advancing. And all of this is before Iraqi troops have even entered the more urban parts of Fallujah that will require house-to-house clearing that will be even slower going.
And what about the dangers that civilians face? We've heard reports that ISIL fighters are threatening to kill anyone who tries to leave.
Yes, we've heard the same thing from civilians inside Fallujah. One family who we spoke to said a relative of theirs tried to escape. He waited until nightfall and tried to leave the city through back roads and farmland, but was caught by IS, and he was shot, and his body was dumped in the middle of the street. The family said that this was intended to be a warning to other civilians inside the city not to attempt to flee. Now, because of because of the fear among civilians and also the tight control that IS has of the roads in and out of the city, almost none of the 50,000 civilians that are trapped in the city center have been able to flee. Some 1,000 families have fled since the operation began, but most of those families were from the outskirts of Fallujah. Humanitarian conditions are dire, and this is just putting even more pressure on Iraqi forces to make progress quickly so that some of these families can be freed from Fallujah before the humanitarian situation inside the city deteriorates further.
Thanks, Susanna. That's CCTV's Susanna George reporting from Baghdad. Joining us now from Erbil is Rend Al-Rahim. She served as Iraq's representative and chief of mission to the United States from 2003 to 2005 and is the co-founder and president of the Iraq Foundation. Rend, thanks for joining us. When we look at this latest battle for Fallujah, question is, why now, and what are the chances of success?
Well, why now is a really important question. I would say there are 3 reasons. One of them is strategic, in that Fallujah is the gateway to Baghdad. And in the last 3 months, the terrorist activities have really spiked in the capital. In all probability, the terrorism is coming from Fallujah. So that the threat to Baghdad from Fallujah has recently risen. And so it's important to try and stem the rise of terrorism. Secondly, I think it's important for the military to show success and stay honed. Remember that we have the Battle of Mosul coming up, perhaps later this year, perhaps in 2017. In the meantime, The army has to stay in practice and has to show successes. And the third reason, of course, is political. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi is in a dreadful political impasse. We've had riots in the streets. We've had people entering the green zone, which is the center of government. And he has been challenged on many levels. And he really needs a success in Fallujah. Now, will they succeed in Fallujah? I believe they will. Now, if you look at the map, there's Fallujah in the center, and then there are outlying villages and areas. Many of those outlying areas and villages have already been taken over by the army and by the various militias that have been formed. And Fallujah is virtually encircled now. What is missing is the center of the city, which is going to be the next and the very big prize. I think it'll come, but they're moving very slowly because of the fear of casualties. So instead of taking days, it may take much longer than we anticipate.
I just want to get back to that third reason you just gave me for launching this offensive, it being political. And I'm wondering whether that is the primary reason for Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi launching this offensive. Is it to divert attention from the problems that he has at home?
Well, it certainly is a very powerful reason. I don't know that I would put it above the reason for securing Baghdad from further or increased terrorist attacks. Fallujah is really the gateway to Baghdad, and there have been so many attacks on areas in the outskirts of Baghdad that lie between Baghdad and Fallujah. And it's very difficult to sustain the casualties. I believe there have been hundreds of casualties in the month of May. I haven't seen final statistics, but there may be as many as 550 casualties, both killed and injured. And that is a level that really the Prime Minister Abadi and the entire nation cannot put up with. So from that perspective, from a security perspective, Fallujah is very important. Politically, Prime Minister al-Abadi does need success. He has been hobbled in every effort that seeks reform. In every way that he has suggested reform, he has been thwarted by the political parties that are entrenched, that have vested interests in the status quo, don't want to see any change. And basically, Prime Minister al-Abadi is very weak. And so gaining Fallujah, winning in Fallujah, is a huge win for him, not only militarily, but also politically.
And what do you think will be the impact on the broader question here of reconciliation between Sunnis and Shias in Iraq? Will a battle of this kind aggravate tensions between these two groups? Because we have Fallujah, which is a Sunni stronghold, and we have Haider al-Abadi, the Prime Minister, who is leading a Shia-dominated government, launching this battle in Fallujah.
Yeah, that's a very important and sensitive issue. If you remember, in the battle for Ramadi, perhaps 2 or 3 months ago, that issue came up very prominently, and the Prime Minister and the Iraqi army and all the armed forces, as well as coalition forces, in this case, of course, we're talking about American forces, were very careful not to antagonize the Sunni population of Ramadi and the areas around Ramadi, Heat, Ana, and so on, that were liberated. Fallujah is a very tough case. Fallujah has been a difficult city since 2004. Now, you may remember that the Americans fought extremists and insurgents in Fallujah not once but twice in 2004. And things haven't improved in Fallujah. People talk about ISIS being taking over Fallujah in early 2014, that is to say before they took over Mosul. I know from my own personal experience that Fallujah has been a stronghold of extremists and proto-ISIS, proto-AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, really since 2003. So there is a difficulty, an ideological difficulty there. And as you say, all the residents of Fallujah are Sunnis. The problem arises in this way. We have the Iraqi armed forces, which are composed of different sort of regular forces that follow the Ministry of Defense and the Prime Minister. We also have Sunni militias that have been trained by the international coalition that is now training the army and so on. And these number about 5,000 troops. Their training is recent. They're not battle-hardened. You also have the Shia militias, which are formerly known as the Popular Mobilization Forces, Shia. And they have proven quite successful in the liberation of cities in Salah ad-Din. And they have done very well, both in the north of the city and to the west of the city, against terrorist attacks and against ISIS itself. In 2014, the Shia militias really protected Baghdad against an encroachment by ISIS. ISIS could have run through the western part of the city if it hadn't been for the Popular Mobilization Forces. Now, those are Shia and very ideologically Shia,
right,
not just Shia on paper. These Shia militias have been part of the overall military campaign against Fallujah. And that is both helpful because they are very capable, they're very well trained, but on the other hand, it poses a problem because the last thing the citizens of Fallujah want, is to see the Shia mobilization forces walk into their city as conquerors,
right,
as victors. And so you have this dilemma. The way it has been resolved so far is that the Popular Mobilization Forces have said that they will help in the encirclement of the city, in the siege of Fallujah, but that they will not enter into the city proper. So far, that pledge has held, although just 2 days ago, one of the leaders of the Shia militia said, well, if necessary, we will also go into the city. If there is a need for us, we will also go into the city. Let us hope that there is no need for them to do so. Let's hope that they can stay on the outskirts, they stay in the outlying areas as a force besieging the city, and that the regular armed forces and the Sunni militias go in and liberate the city. And therefore, the Sunnis and government troops and the Iraqi army are the liberators.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We need to take a short break right now. Next, we'll have much more on the Iraqi operation in Fallujah. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back to The Heat. A major offensive is underway by Iraqi forces to recapture the city of Fallujah from ISIL fighters. Joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Abbas Kadim. He's a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins University. From Erbil, we're joined by Hiba Osman. He's an Iraqi Kurdish journalist and commentator. Also with us is Brigadier General Ismail al-Sadani. He served in the Iraqi army for nearly 30 years before retiring in 2011. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Ismail, let me start with you. You're a former military man. You were a brigadier general in the Iraqi army. You served as defense attaché here in Washington. What is your assessment of the battle right now in Fallujah?
Well, the battle has started on May 22nd. The components of the Iraqi forces are Iraqi army, the elite counterterrorism forces, and the federal police, the local police from Fallujah itself, tribal fighters who has been trained under United States contingency, and as well as the Popular Mobilization Forces who has been prepared by the Iraqi government to participate in this battle. The battle itself has been divided into several phases, in fact, in order to ensure the maximum use of the resources available to the commander, as well as to minimize the losses that may take place or may occur during the operation on the civilians as well as on our troops or the Iraqi troops. The objective of the mission or the operation is to eradicate, recapture Fallujah and eradicate the presence of ISIS elements in the city. So far, the ongoing operation has already achieved the first and second phases, which is getting closer to the city and encircle all the city from 360 degrees. Iraq has recaptured Karma town and the villages around. They have that is from the west. Yeah. They have recaptured An-Ni'imiyya in the south. They have recaptured as well the Saqlawiyya and multiple bridges on the Euphrates River.
Okay, let me go to Hiwa Osman in Erbil. Hiwa, Fallujah is a city which is very close to Baghdad. It fell to Islamic State in 2014. Why has it taken so long for the government in Baghdad to make these kinds of efforts to recapture that city?
Well, there are various military considerations for attacking Fallujah. The general perception about Fallujah is that there will be fierce and heavy fighting in Fallujah. The fear that there will be a bloodbath in the city and many civilian casualties seems to have been what stopped the Iraqi government from attacking. So Iraqi and American and the Americans to make the decision on the start. But the key thing here is, in the absence of a political settlement of the disputes between Iraqis, between Shia and Sunni in Iraq, I think it will be very difficult to just look at the conflict with ISIS from a pure military and security one. There's the portfolio or the issue of national reconciliation that has led to mistrust between the various components of the Iraqi society. The failure of national reconciliation has led to conditions that allowed for the likes of ISIS to emerge, and eradicating them through military operation alone will not be enough. The thinking has to be done about the day after ISIS. In these, I do not see or hear anything from the government so far about the political deal on the day after ISIS or the day after liberating these areas after ISIS. There isn't a political package for those who are under ISIS today for the day after.
Abbas, Hiwa raises an important point there, and that is the lack of a political solution right now to the differences that exist between the Shias and the Sunnis, and also looking at the timing of this attempt to retake Fallujah. There's a very respected analyst at Chatham House in London, head of the Middle East program, Lina Khatib, who says that the timing, and I'm quoting here, the timing of the Fallujah initiative is very much politically motivated. Abadi, that's the Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, has not yet delivered politically, so in a way he's seeking stability through military engagement with ISIL.
Well, of course, the timing is always problematic whenever, I mean, this is not just unique to Iraq, even here in the United States, every time there is a military operation, people question, because the political and the military always coincide, and it's very hard to really judge the intentions. But at the end of the day, I think that there, as much skepticism as there about the timing and about why and the motivations, basically. There are also calls for a long time now that Fallujah is overdue, and it is very hard. I think, if anything, the Iraqi government took too long to take the initiative and make a final assault on ISIS and Fallujah, because you need to extend your sovereignty over the areas close to the capital before you think and you plan to take places as far away as Mosul, which is manifold, the distance between the Mosul and Baghdad as compared with Fallujah. So the timing, you can always find problems with the timing, with the motivations, but at the final assessment, the Iraqi government is doing the right thing by not allowing this city to be under ISIS for any longer, and also strategically it is the right move before going to Mosul.
Right, Ismail, the Iraqi government may believe that it's doing the right thing, but is this the right strategy? Because even Iraq's closest allies here in the Pentagon, there was a Pentagon spokesman who said last month that there is no military reason to retake Fallujah. It brings no tactical advantage to the ultimate aim of taking Mosul.
Well, everybody has his own assessment on this situation. In my perspective as a military, I think that Fallujah should have been a top priority and retaken from ISIS even before Tikrit, because 3 miles away from the center of gravity, Baghdad. It's north of Karbala, 100 kilometers, south of Samarra, 100 kilometers, 25 miles away from Ramadi. Had Iraqi government took the initiative and taken Fallujah earlier, we wouldn't have seen Ramadi to fall down to ISIS. This is really a very significant point, because we have lost lots of resources, manpower, time in retaking Ramadi in the same time. However, things are happening now, and the strategy is taking Fallujah in the concentration, and I think this is a pure advantage for the Iraqi security forces when they will take Fallujah. The western corridor, all the way to the border, the western border with Syria, with Jordan, will be cleared, and there will be the pressure on ISIS from the west, and the southern west, Mosul, will be encircled ISIS and Mosul.
Oh, let me ask you this. There may be these differences being expressed by the Pentagon on strategy, but is the Iraqi army getting military support from the United States in this battle?
Of course. You know, Iraq army could not move forward without the crucial support of the United States.
Okay.
And I think this is Iraq as a part of the international coalition to counter ISIS, which has been founded, I think, September 2014.
Right.
And the crucial support is the aerial support, which Iraq is really in need for it. The logistic, equipping the troops. I give you one example. Just recently, I have received a report from the CTF. They have received, you know, a mines clearing a system, which is Canadian. We call it MICIC. And this is very crucial to clear the mines or the booby traps that is already rigging on the countless number of in the city of Fallujah.
All right.
There is intelligence support as well. There is a training, advisory, and this is really so important for the operation to. Yes, it is a national operation, but it is framed with international support, and this is legalize the operation more and more.
Okay. Let me here. We talk about military strategy here and what. You know, forces on the ground are doing, but what about the situation inside Fallujah? I mean, what is the humanitarian situation inside there? Because we're getting reports that Islamic State is using civilians as human shields.
Well, talking to the humanitarian workers and aid workers who have been in the areas or receiving the people from Fallujah and moved into the liberated areas from IS, the humanitarian situation is quite catastrophic, to be honest. There seems to be, ISIS has used a lot of the civilians, first as human shields and second as pressure points for the Iraqi army and the others not to enter. Aspect of this was using the local Sunni population in order to justify it or turn it into a Shia-Sunni war, and this is what ISIS has been trying to do from the start, to turn this into a Shia-Sunni war, a Kurd-Arab war, a Christian versus Muslim war, and that's why, as a result of all of these attempts by ISIS, the need grows more and more for political package for the day after ISIS, so that the people who are under ISIS are also encouraged to take up arms and or to resist the presence of ISIS in their areas. In terms of humanitarian situation, it is quite bad, and I don't think the Iraqi government is as ready as it is militarily to take on Fallujah. It is not as ready to take these refugees or the extra people who are fleeing the areas of the conflict. There doesn't seem to be the infrastructure for them, and hence international help will be very much needed, I think, in the coming weeks or months if the battle is to continue to take Mosul or other areas from ISIS.
Right. Abbas, when Hiwa talks about the need for a political solution, is this Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi trying to negotiate from a position of strength, saying we'll clear the battlefield first, then we'll talk diplomacy?
Well, this is a sensible thing to do, but I believe that the negotiation in Iraq is much more complex than this. The Prime Minister does not have as many constitutional powers to impose any kind of solutions, and even his negotiation. The Prime Minister's office is politically weak by design, and that is a problem. Also, to add to that, is that right now there aren't any negotiation partners you can engage with. There are those who are in the Council of Ministers, and there is no negotiation to do with. They are on board, but the problem is that there are people who are against the government as such. And how are you going to negotiate with them? Because their entire demand is to dismantle everything that happened after 2003, and then you go back and rebuild on different setting, and that's rejected by the Iraqis and also by the international community. And to add to this also, we have to remember that the Iraqi government is, in addition to all of what I said, is there is a lot of corruption, incompetence in the government, and that hindered the concept of the reconciliation. Iraqis.
So you don't sound very optimistic that there's going to be some kind of a negotiated solution.
No, I think he was correct when he said there isn't much of a coherent plan for what happens after.
Right.
That is the negotiation, the reconciliation phase. That is the rehabilitation of these areas. Iraqis are equipped and they are not competent enough to do the reconciliation. They have failed in all of their reconciliation efforts because their entire concept of reconciliation is reconciliation among politicians and parties rather than communal reconciliation. And Iraqi problems are not going to be saved or solved by adding one more ministry to another corrupt politician. Right. It is really, you need to go deeper than that, and you need to do it in a scientific way, take cues from the successful reconciliation cases that happened around the world, and there are so many good examples, and frame it in an Iraqi way to do it. The Iraqi government has not shown any willingness to do this yet, and they have not sought help.
Okay, gentlemen, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.